Since I started my YouTube channel, one piece of equipment I always wanted to try was this Nikon Z 50mm f2.8 macro lens. But as you know, I like shooting astrophotography, so I was really curious, could this 50mm macro also double as a astrophotography and Nightscape lens? Hello everybody, I'm Will Cheney. In this video I'm going to be taking a look at the Nikon Z 50mm f2.8 macro lens and looking at how it performs as a macro, but also taking an in-depth look at how it performs as an astrophotography and Nightscape lens. In this video I'll walk through the key specs about the lens, I'll talk about what I like and dislike about it, and we'll also take a look at a few sample images to see the performance of it. And finally I'll discuss who I think this is a great lens for. So let's get started. So this lens comes in with a price tag of about $646.95. So not super expensive, but it still is a decent chunk of change when you're trying to get into having a 50mm lens for astrophotography, but also wanting one that does really well in the macro side. And the next thing that I'll note is it is a prime lens, so it only shoots at 50mm, so unfortunately no zoom on it, but that does mean that the optics are optimized for, you know, the macro photography that the lens was designed to do. Next up, I'll note on here that it is a Z mount lens, so it's got that wider mount than what you may be used to on an F mount. And it's also a full frame lens, meaning that it'll work great on your full frame cameras. The next thing to look at on it, it is a f2.8 lens, so it can shoot at those, you know, super wide open apertures, but it also can go down to f22. So when you're trying to increase that depth of field, that'll help you out there. The next thing to note on this one, as a 50mm macro, it does actually reproduce in a 1:1 size. So it was really cool with this, paired with a Z7 II, getting to see some of those high resolution 1:1 macro images. Next up, combined with the 9 diaphragm blades and also the 10 lens elements, you get really nice sharp images, and also you get some cool bokeh effects when you get into those really shallow depth of field images. Another cool thing to note on this, it is autofocus and manual focus, and you can also set it to work in a range of 0.16 meters to 0.3 meters for that focus, and you can also change it over to full, so when you want to do those farther away like infinity type shots. So that gives you that ability to work in those finer adjustments if you need it for the macro photography. The next thing to note is just the size and the weight. So it's 3 inches long and it's 2.6 inches in diameter. So fairly small lens. And then looking at the weight, it's under 1 pound, just a hair over half a pound. So it's 9.2 ounces. So coming up next, I want to walk through what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it. And then if you'll stick around towards the end, we'll go through some sample images that I took, both macro and astrophotography, if you want to see how it works in both of those realms. So stay tuned for that, but at this point, if you like the video, I'd love it if you'd give it a thumbs up, and also be sure to subscribe while you're here. And if you have any questions regarding this lens, whether how it performed in macro or astrophotography, please be sure to leave those down in the comments below, and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as I can. So first up, what I want to talk about for the likes, I really liked how sharp it was for macro photography. Just going through some of the images that I took, you get super sharp, crisp images at that macro level, and we'll walk through that in a little bit with the with some of the test images. And the next thing, as always for me, I like lenses that are lightweight, and that's been a really nice thing with the new Z mount lenses. So really like the weight on this, and I also really like the size of it. In those macro images, and even the astrophotography images that I took with it, I thought the colors came out really well. There wasn't any hue or tinting going on to the images like I've seen with some other lenses from Sigma and other manufacturers. And I think that's just something at this point that I expect out of a Nikon lens. It's paired with the camera that I use, so you get those good colors when you balance the Nikon lens with a Nikon camera. So another thing that I really liked about this lens was the fine adjustments for the macro images. So if I go ahead and throw this here onto a camera, hopefully you can see this whenever I go through. Whenever I change it down here to the close in and just keeping it on manual, you'll notice just how subtly that this thing focuses. So if you get in, you'll see it's actually got markings on it as well to help you figure out how close you need to be. So you'll kind of notice how far I'm actually turning, but how little the lens is actually adjusting for that. So anyways, thought that was pretty cool on this. It made for some cool shots. shooting macro and setting up the step focusing on the Z7. The next thing that I found that I liked on it was that 1:1 ratio. I tried to get a few shots of a flower, but I'm not a hugely experienced macro photographer, so it didn't come out super great there, but I did get some shots of a candle that were pretty cool. But just being able to see that 1:1 and then with the resolution when you go into Lightroom or Photoshop makes for a really cool experience. Then finally, another thing that I thought was cool on it was the bokeh. I didn't really get a chance to put it, you know, into real use by going and shooting like portraits of people with cool light bulbs back behind them so you could get all those cool little bokeh balls behind them. But I mean, you'll notice it here in this image that you get to see what it would kind of look like just off of some reflections. And then finally, I like the price of the lens, coming in about $650. It puts it into a range that I think makes it affordable for a lot of people. So it's not like out of a lot of people's price range, like getting a 50mm 1.2 that is much higher than $650. So just something to think about. It does give you a great lens for getting into macro if that's something that you're interested in. I want to take a quick break to give a big shout out and thank you to my sponsor for this video, lensrentals.com. If you're in the market for new gear, I highly recommend using Lens Rentals to give that gear a try or to make sure the purchase that you're about to make is the right one. Or if you have a piece of equipment you only need to use once, Lens Rentals can get you the equipment to get the job done. Their customer service staff is right there to help you work through your rental needs. Their website is streamlined from start to finish, and their packaging speaks for itself. If interested in renting, check the description below for a discount code. And now let's get back to the video. The next thing that I want to go through and talk about is my dislikes with this lens. The first dislike that I have with this 50mm lens is that it's going to make it to where you pretty much have to use a star tracker in the field when trying to take astrophotography images. And that's just because of the lower exposures that you're gonna have to use in order to keep the stars from trailing. Next up, the thing that I dislike is also the f2.8. I'd like it to go a little bit lower like some of the other lenses in the Nikon lineup. And the reason being that at f2.8 you do get some vignetting, and we'll go over that here in a few minutes. And then finally, the third thing that I didn't like about this lens as an astrophotography lens was that it's just not super sharp out in the corners. There is astigmatism out there, and again, we'll walk through that here in just a minute as we take a look at some of the photos in depth. So at this point, let's dive in and we'll take a look at some of the test images that I took. So the first image that I want to take a look at here, really looking at the vignetting that's going on with the f2.8, you'll notice out in the corners it starts to get pretty dark. The Milky Way does show itself at a 5-second exposure, but as I said, you get this vignetting that's going along here at the edges. Unfortunately, I didn't take test shots at, you know, f3.2 or f4, any of those, but the vignetting nevertheless is still prevalent in this photo. Moving on to the next photo, we'll go ahead and take a look at the astigmatism going on out in the corners. This photo, you know, from a distance, it looks great. I still like it. However, when you go in, you zoom in really close, I mean, there's just a lot of issues with this lens out in the corners. Even these little smaller stars have astigmatism, so it's not just the really bright ones. So just be aware of that if you're wanting to use this lens for astrophotography. I haven't printed an image off of this one, so I don't know, you know, trying to look at a larger image, how much it really shows itself from a viewing distance, but just be aware of that. And then looking at even going into some star trails, so kind of a similar image that I was looking at in the first one with the same composition, but when you zoom in here, you can kind of see it looks like a halo on the star trails. So overall, the star trails look good, but you do get that astigmatism. And then taking a look at one more test image, just another from that's actually the same composition here. You can see that astigmatism again showing up at the halo that goes around the star trail. This one to me was a little bit more prevalent, but just be aware of that. And that really, for me, that astigmatism is what knocks this lens out to me as something that I'd want to have in my bag as a dedicated astrophotography type lens. And since it is a macro, I figured might as well take a couple of quick looks at some of the macro stuff with this lens.
This one, not so much a macro image, but I thought it did a good job of just showing what some of the bokeh looks like. Here's a macro shot of a bluebonnet. I could have gotten in closer with it, but it was pretty windy, so I was trying to just get an image of a bluebonnet that stood out against the background. And then this one I just thought kind of showed the bokeh balls that you get with this lens.
So that kind of leads me into my next thing of who I think that this lens is for. Obviously, macros in the name. I think it's great for anybody that wants macro photography of flowers, insects, whatever details it is that you're going for to get those awesome shots that are close up. I also felt like it did great for portraits. I did go take a few photos of my daughter running around in the bluebonnets here in Texas since it is the spring. And I felt that I got some really cool photos out of that with being able to utilize that shallow depth of field. And I also got to play around a little bit with the flowers. Just with some cool macro shots of those that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to get with my other lenses. I also think that for somebody that's dedicated to macro and just wants to play around with astrophotography, it's a great lens. You'll just have to be careful of looking in the corners at some of the imperfections that you might find out there. But if you're not a dedicated astro person, and you just want that macro lens, I think it's great for you. So the last person that I think this is for is somebody that likes to take their old slide photography films or likes to pull their old negatives. Nikon does make an adapter for this lens where you can actually go get those one-to-one images. It's a pretty cool little nifty adapter to pair up with this and digitize your old photography. So wrapping this video up, I thought that this was an awesome little lens to go try out. I think I got some great product shots for my videos, and I'm looking forward to seeing how those come out in these YouTube videos as I make them. It's got me really highly considering buying this lens just for the help with this YouTube channel. And then I also had a lot of fun. I had a friend that's starting a candle company and getting to take some different shots that I don't normally do and playing around with that close-up macro level of a lit candle and getting able to have the chance to help her out with her business. So that was fun. In terms of the astrophotography, like I said, not super sure that I would want this in my bag as an astro lens. I think if you're trying to go with a 50mm dedicated astro lens, you really need to look into that Nikon 50mm f1.2 or the f1.8. Just depends on the budgets that you're willing to spend there. So that's something that I think you should think about. And then just finally, if you're thinking about buying this lens or you're interested in trying it out, be sure to check out my affiliate links down below for lensrentals.com if you want to give the lens a shot. And then also I'll have affiliate links down below if you're looking at purchasing it, and it'd really help me out if you'd support the channel by using those links. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel while you're here, and if you're interested in other astrophotography videos, be sure to check out the video that I posted with a detailed review of the Nikon Z7 II for astrophotography. Thanks everybody, and I'll see you next time.